Thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Arwa Damon. I am a former CNN senior international correspondent. I also have a charity. I've obviously spent a lot of time in the Middle East and in Afghanistan and across the world, both in my capacity as a journalist and as a humanitarian. Today's conversation is called Peace Talks and Gender. And before we get into that, I want to first of all start off by thanking the organizers, the Syrian Women's Political Movement, the Afghan Women's Coordination Umbrella, and Window for Hope. We also want to extend our gratitude to the co-sponsors, Belgium, Canada, the EU, France, Germany, Luxembourg, the UK, and the United States. A little bit of housekeeping. Unfortunately, due to the situation that is currently ongoing in Ankara, and because the team is based in Ankara, we will not be able to live stream this on Facebook and other social media platforms, but it will be available later. And one of our speakers will be talking in Arabic, and there will be translation available for that. This conversation right now about gender could arguably not come at a more significant time given the turmoil, for lack of a better word, that we are seeing across the Middle East and the situation in Afghanistan and in many other countries. I think a lot of what we see happening is, many could argue, a byproduct of what happens when women are excluded from conversations. And when women are included in conversations, and our speakers from Afghanistan and Syria will be able to testify to this today. But when women are included in conversations, they are often tokenized, they are paid lip service to, or they are used as window dressing. And this has come, as we have seen, to the detriment of the future of both Afghanistan and Syria, especially the female populations in those countries. And so we're here today to talk about why that needs to change if we are really going to genuinely want to work towards lasting change and security. We'll be talking about lessons learned, and more importantly, how to change the prevailing attitude towards women and what their seats should be looking like at this so-called metaphorical table. So to start off this conversation, I want to first turn to Mariam Safi, who is the founding director of the Organization for Policy Research and Developmental Studies. You've been very critical of WPS and the way that it currently functions, but also of the rhetoric that is often used. And you also know quite well what happens when there is no female representation, or when it is simply being used to tick off a box, especially when it came to the conversations that were happening previously with the Taliban. Could you tell us about that, please?
Thank you very much. It's indeed a great pleasure to be here. And I'm I feel very privileged and honored to be here with our Syrian friends. It's a rare opportunity that we're able to come together. We all have the same goals and objectives. Our contexts may be different, but it's an honor for us and my Afghan colleagues. Arwa, to get to your question, in the 15 years that I worked inside of Afghanistan, WPS was a cross-cutting theme. It was a theme that the Afghan government had to mainstream through its ministries, the international community, INGOs, and basically all stakeholders. But one of the things that we noticed quite clearly in Afghanistan was that the objectives of WPS and the political will behind implementing WPS was never connected. There was a huge disjoint there. The resources needed to implement WPS was never readily available. And lastly, WPS was more like an outside agenda coming in and being implemented on a context. There wasn't the space to be able to merge local views and local ownership within the WPS agenda, so WPS could reflect the aspirations of the women of Afghanistan. So that was always missing. So what happened as a result? WPS was treated more rhetorically. Yes, we had a lot of success during the Republic period in Afghanistan, and you've heard those time and time again, whether it was education, whether it was employment, whether it was women's political leadership, parliament, ministers, deputy, etc. But when the Republic fell, how long did it take for the Taliban to reverse all of that, which we had worked for in 20 years? It took them anywhere from 6 to 8 months. And that's it. And I think that was probably the most shocking thing for me, because as a member of civil society, I started to question what we were doing. If it was so easy, if it was so easy for them to reverse it, you can imagine how unsustainable it was. WPS, unfortunately, when we had our Afghan peace process, and I'm talking about not the U.S. Taliban talks, but the talks between the Republic and the talks between the Taliban. At that time, at our organization, we had started an initiative called Bishnow, and what we were doing was collecting gender segregated data, so women's opinions across the country, on every single topic that was being discussed at the table. I remember the first topic that we surveyed Afghan women was on the exchange of prisoners, because that was happening first. And then afterwards, we talked about the reduction of violence. After exchange of prisoners, have you noticed a reduction of violence? After that, we talked about the Hanafi jurisprudence, what the Taliban said should be the guiding principles in our negotiation talks, and etc. All of the narratives that we had gathered was going counter to what we were seeing happen on the table. Now, for us, those views that we were collecting in the thousands represented the views of Afghan women. But where was WPS to advance those voices, to say half of the population is telling you that they're not noticing a reduction of violence after the exchange of prisoners? They're telling you that we're noticing that those prisoners that have been released are joining the battlefield. They were saying this as early as September of 2020. But WPS pillars were not there to be able to strengthen these voices. And when the Republic fell, it was so interesting. If you look at the data that's there, women were telling you step by step what was coming and what was going to happen. So moving forward on WPS in particular right now, to be honest with you, we don't know how to talk about pursuing WPS when there's a morality law now in Afghanistan, where women's voices are now considered private parts and should be hidden. I honestly didn't realize that it could get this worse. I couldn't have thought of it in my wildest dreams. The Taliban didn't have a morality law during the 90s, but they have it now. So many people who say the Taliban have changed, they have certainly changed. They've changed for the worse, as we heard earlier today from a colleague in Afghanistan. For WPS to be able to function or work, I'm hoping that next year, when it gets unpacked, it has to have one thing in particular, and that is the flexibility to be able to, and the political will to be implemented in states where there are authoritarian and totalitarian regimes. If WPS cannot function in those types of regimes, which are increasing, then it will not work. WPS is failing, and WPS will not have a future if it cannot be able to circumvent and navigate these difficult environments. So I have no idea how to talk to you about WPS in Afghanistan. Women are imprisoned in their homes, and the Taliban has a morality law in place. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think, it's quite important to also recognize that, when certain systems fail, or appear to be failing, like WPS, that is when we actually see women reclaiming certain kinds of spaces themselves and actually doing the hard work on the ground. But talking about the way that, women are actually creating their own spaces. We're also seeing this happening in Afghanistan. And there is something that is, the female resistance, the women who are actually living in Afghanistan under these horrible conditions that, Mariam was just telling us about, that are still figuring out ways to fight back. And to speak to us about that, Hasina Jalal is an academic, human rights advocate, and a former policy advisor for the Ministry of Energy in Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very glad to be here, especially together with the Arab women of Syria, and I've met different women activists from different countries, including Palestine and other countries. It has been really great. It's my first time experiencing this kind of solidarity and working together. I will try to be very brief because we have only limited time, and come to the main points. I assume, and hopefully everyone knows about what's going on in Afghanistan. The things that really made me shocked was women not being able to lately allowed to go to shrines, graveyards. I mean, I've been shocked from the beginning. Out of 192 edicts of the emirate or the Taliban leader, 114 have been to ban women in different ways, from public and social and economic lives, and put them inside the houses as childbearing objects and whatnot. So, however, when it comes to what the international community needs to do, and specifically the UN member states that are here, from the research that I recently did, as well as my work back in Afghanistan, inside the government, as well as in the civil society, I would like to come directly to the recommendations, and these recommendations, some of them comes directly from the women rights social movement leaders and founders. We have, as you know, between 30 to 40 recognized social movements that are founded by the women inside Afghanistan, and on average they claim to have at least 100 women, and a few of them men also actively participating inside the country, as well as in Pakistan and Iran. So basically representing sample of 3,500 active resistance forces, which are mostly women. But also, I would like to mention that my findings show that the men inside their houses, mostly 95% of these women say that their husbands, their fathers, their male relatives, they have been supportive of them, as well as helping them behind their backs. And the men who haven't been able to, that's another conversation about why men of Afghanistan haven't. If anybody was interested, I would love to talk about that. But my findings doesn't show that men of Afghanistan are all agree with the Taliban, or that they are not courageous enough to do it. But there are other factors that doesn't allow them to be on the streets. Basically, what these women, which 11 of them were arrested by the Taliban, and I interviewed them. I interviewed 35 of them, and as I said, there's 30 to 40 social movements in Afghanistan, and there are a few areas that the international community can work on. And first and foremost, it's as you know, it's important that legal structures are there, and international human rights laws, as my colleagues here discussed about WP is not being maybe the right framework anymore, the right structure to be implemented in different contexts, especially conflict or post-conflict. Or I still consider Afghanistan conflict, because when Taliban, the fallacy of peace that they are promoting is not, Afghanistan is not peaceful. Peace is not just the absence of war. There is still some we can say war or resilience, resistance ongoing inside the country here and there, but the actual definition of peace is human dignity, is justice, is freedom, is where people can see themselves. When as an Afghan woman, I cannot go back to my country, and millions of us cannot see ourselves in our countries. We cannot see that Afghanistan is free or peaceful. So for Afghanistan, for the international community to look into the recently the 80 countries who co-sponsored a resolution that was launched by Mexico and Gambia on Crimes Against Humanity Convention. This is a great news for women of Afghanistan, and I think if this is ratified, the gender apartheid can be a part of this, where that will lead to open a mechanism of accountability and conversation about how the Taliban can effectively be taken to the ICG, and they have to answer to what they're doing. And when it comes to the resistance of women, after the 3 years, I found out that because of all the retaliation by the Taliban, that they were arrested, you've seen the news and reports. So now mostly the resistance is in digitally, social media, and international communities should work on creating safe spaces for digital activism for women, and addressing digital gender-based violence, especially at the age of AI, and giving digital literacy to the women inside the country, because economically also there's a new report that got published, I think today or this week, about the gender apartheid and its impact on Afghanistan's economy. And you can see that there's only 5% of labor force as women currently working in comparison to the average global average of 49%. And there's different estimations of if women were in the economy, how that would have impacted the region and Afghanistan's overall political economy. So basically, for the international community, it's very important that they continue supporting the small and medium enterprises and businesses inside the country, the women who are there, as well as the nonprofit sector, women-led organizations, especially when it comes to the humanitarian aid, because we know that the Taliban have been able to influence the distribution and where it will be distributed, to whom it will be given, what and what not. And some of these women that I talk with inside the country who work for INGOs, they tell me that Taliban are basically very powerful in running our implementation strategies, if not our overall policies. They've been controlling the surveillance on the INGOs are very powerful too. So it's, I think, very important for the UN to discuss with them this. And when it comes to the political front, I think for Afghan women, looking at the Syrian women's political movement in the past 2 days, we've been having great discussions, and I think Afghan women in exile and diaspora also needs to unite. However, I would like to comment something on unity, because I disagree with a lot of the international community or member states or different countries when they say Afghan woman has to unite and then we will support you. The unity needs to be understood well, because remember, Afghanistan is not a mono-ethnic, ideological country. It's made of very diverse ethnic groups, sects, age groups, very important, because 75% of Afghanistan is young people. So when people in the West say, oh, a lot of people support the Taliban, they didn't resist, they didn't fight with the Taliban, the military accepted the Taliban to come back. Remember, who are these people? Like 75% of people are people like me and my generation who grew up under, with relative freedom. So it's important to understand that unity does not mean that all Afghan women should have the same demands from the Taliban, from the international community, from each other. And my findings show that while some of the women, if I just briefly tell you the two extremes, while some group of women, majority, does not want any engagement with the Taliban, meaning no conversation, we do not recognize them, they are terrorists, we're not going to sit with them on the same table. There are some other women who would say, hey, like, they are the reality of Afghanistan. If we're not talking with them, then what is the alternative? What should we do? So recognizing these voices and not playing the game of if you're not united, we're not going to support you. The international community needs to support these diverse voices with differences of opinion, just like any other country. Like in America, you wouldn't say to people either have the same opinion or we're not going to recognize you. It's important that these women movements with the diversity of opinions be recognized and supported by the international community. Otherwise, Afghan women by themselves might not get to where some of our other sisters are when it comes to resistance against their authoritarian regimes in their respective countries. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Very important message. I think we've sorted out the translation issue for Alise to be able to pick back up. We'll just do it here in the room.
شكرا أروى، شكرا للجميع وشكرا لمشاركتكم معنا. سأضطر للإعادة باختصار بما بدأت به بالمقدمة كي لا يتم إخفاء صوتنا كما تحدثت زميلتنا من أفغانستان. نحن النساء نعم لدينا أولويات، ولكن أولويات النساء تتقاطع مع جميع الأولويات التي كنت أتحدث عنها. كون الآن العنف معمم في الشرق الأوسط، الاقتتال قائم، لدينا مذابح في غزة، لدينا أيضا حرب مستعرة في لبنان، والاقتتال في سوريا لم يتوقف حتى اللحظة. لذلك أولوياتنا اليوم إذا أردنا أن نتحدث عن مشاركة نسائية ألا نقفز على الواقع، لأننا نحتاج وقف إطلاق نار شامل. نريد عودة النازحين واللاجئين إلى أماكن سكناهم الأصلية. نريد تقديم المساعدات العاجلة، لأن حق الحياة هو مبدأ لا يتجزأ، وهو الأولوية التي تتفوق على كل الأولويات الحالية. ودائما في كل موقف دائما نذكر بقضية المعتقلين، هذه أيضا أولوية، لأن معاناة النساء هي عبء مضاعف عن معاناة الجميع، سواء من المعتقلات أو من ذويهم، بسبب ما يعانونه. ولكن بنفس الوقت يجب أن نزامن وأن نتعامل بأننا نريد مسار سياسي لحل سياسي شامل. وعليه نحن في الحركة السياسية النسوية نطالب بهذه الأولويات، وبنفس الوقت نحن نعمل. نحن حركة سياسية نسوية استثنائية في الشرق الأوسط، تجمع جميع النساء السياسيات من مختلف الانتماءات الإثنية والقوميات والطوائف، ولكن أيضا من مختلف الانتماءات السياسية. ما يجمعنا أننا نريد حل سياسي وفق القرارات الدولية، ولكن نعمل على الملفات الانتقال السياسي من منظور جندري، لأننا نراعي الحساسيات الجندرية. وعليه نحن توقفنا عن المطالبة بتمثيل النساء في المساحة السياسية. أنا جزء من هيئة المفاوضات السياسية، ولاحظنا بأن التمثيل العددي جدا ضعيف. لذلك الحركة الآن تقود المسار السياسي النسوي. نحن نريد تضمين مصالحنا نحن النساء في العملية السياسية الشاملة. لم نتوقف عن المطالبة، ولكننا نعمل من أجل هذا التمثيل. هذا المسار السياسي النسوي نقوده أنا وزميلتي لينا وفائي مع الفريق الداعم السياسي النسوي في الحركة، حيث نقوم بجمع مكونات الهيئة التفاوضية السورية السياسية فقط، التي يعترف بها القرار 2254 مع 6 أو 7 مكونات سياسية من خارج المسار الرسمي. نهدف من أجل خلق مساحة تشاركية بين المسارين، لخلق هذه المساحة لإتاحة منظور شامل من أجل صناعة موقف اتجاه القضايا الإشكالية التي تتعلق بالسوريين. نقود النقاش حول القضايا الإشكالية المختلف عليها سوريا لكي نصل إلى توافقات. ونحن نحاول في ظل العطالة السياسية، بظل المأزق الاستعصاء، بأن نخلق من هذا المأزق فرصة من أجل توافق السوريين والسوريات، وفرصة أيضا لتضمين رؤيتنا كنساء في المرحلة الانتقالية سواء على المدى القريب أو على المدى البعيد. لن أطيل بما أن الترجمة مشكلة ودائما هي مشكلة، لأن نريد أصواتنا بلغتنا أن يتم الاهتمام بالمنظور التقاطعي للنساء من خلفيات المتنوعة اللواتي لا يتحدثن الإنجليزية في هذا المنبر الدولي، لكي نسمح للعديد من النساء أن يكن موجودات هنا وأن يسمع صوتهن. أخيرا سوف أتحدث بأن هذا المسار السياسي الذي نقوده نحن في الحركة السياسية النسوية ونقوم بتيسيره كي لا يتم إخفاء صوتنا، وكي نقول بأن السوريات والسوريين يجب أن يصلوا لدولة المواطنة المتساوية غير المنتقصة. شكرا جزيلا.
Clearly, the Syrian women's political movement does have quite a few multitaskers on it, to include the co-founder Alise, who we just heard from, and also Hind and Sabiha Khalil, who I want to turn to next. Sabiha is also the founder of Dudari and an advocate for an inclusive peace process. And it seems kind of absurd that we're actually talking about the need for women to have a seat at the table, given that, you know, we are obviously 50% of the population, but that's the reality that we face. And you've had an especially challenging circumstance with that, because you're actually trying to approach this from two separate tracks, both in terms of human rights and then also on a political level in a dictatorship.
Thank you very much. Rojbash. It is a pleasure to be with you all. And saying Rojbash means good afternoon. Because the Syrian issue is having different layers. So one of these layers is the Kurdish issue inside Syria. Being part and co-founder of the Syrian women political movement and being also Kurdish, I take the burden to talk a little bit about the Kurdish issue inside Syria. So as my colleague Alise Mofrej has mentioned, that Syria now is silenced by the international community because we have other wars that has been erupted, but still there's no ceasefire. No one of Syrians, unfortunately, knows who will raise the flag to say, hey, come on, come around the table, you have to start the transition, political transition. But still, this layer, which I'm going to address in these only few minutes, I guess I have only 3 or 4 minutes to say, which means the Kurdish issue is still remaining unsolved. My colleagues asked me, how do women resist? Being a Kurdish woman, people always imagine that I'm holding a gun on my shoulder. But those who knows me very close knows that I don't believe in violence. And I do believe that hundreds of thousands of Kurdish Syrian Kurds do not also believe in violence. So when it comes to solving the issue of violence and the issue of resistance, I do believe that there are other mechanisms that should be backed and supported by the international community, especially for Kurds. They are having, as I mentioned, a complex issue inside different states. So today I'm just mentioning Syria as a country that should be reconstructed, that should be having a political solution, but still what is expected from Kurds is only to be fighters. And I do believe that this should not go forever. Kurds should be represented around the negotiation tables. I'm not going to tell you that personally I have been excluded different times for nothing, just because I am Kurdish. So another issue that has been as a solution and has been imposed to Syrians, demographical changes that has told most Syrian areas, started from Damascus suburb and not ending with the North Syria. I'm being one of my parents and my friends, my beloved, are now having they are suffering from these of course I mean this mechanism which has been implemented all over Syria, which is demographical changes. Now, talking to you, we do believe as women, yes, we have a role that we should play, but also the international community is having a role to help those who are unable to solve their issues. Actually, I am going to conclude because my time is finished, unfortunately. I know that I'm not able to tell you the whole issue, which is more complicated, but I would say the role is women is very important, and also the role of international community is very important. And I would conclude with saying women and their role is not only like a fire extinguisher, like only used in wars to extinguish fire, and then hanged in corridors in peace times. We are effective every time and should be effective and should present at negotiation and decision center too. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And sorry, I'm gonna change things up a little bit in terms of the order because I understand that Her Excellency, the U.S. Permanent Representative, has a hard out, but we do appreciate you being here, Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield. I will turn it over to you right now.
Thank you. I didn't mean for you to have to do that.
That's okay.
Let me say how happy I am to be here with you. I want to thank you, the Syrian Women's Political Movement, Afghan Women's Coordination Umbrella, Women of Hope, all of you for bringing us together today. And I want to express profound gratitude to all of you for really detailing with moral clarity the plight facing women and girls in Afghanistan and in Syria and conflict zones everywhere, Gaza, Sudan, DRC. There's so many places around the world where women are on the front lines of being victimized. And as we sit here today, Afghan women and girls are experiencing renewed gender persecution, including gender and sexual-based violence. Mariam, you said something that really resonated with me. I have a weird background. So in the mid-90s, I worked on Afghan issues and traveled and worked inside Afghanistan, meeting with the Taliban in the 1990s. And I thought they were horrible back then. They are worse today. And if they could go back to what they were back then, we'd probably be thankful. Because what we have seen is they have issued dozens of archaic edicts curtailing the freedom of speech of women, barring girls over the age of 12 from pursuing education, implementing their so-called morality laws that really effectively erase women from public life. And the institutional oppression really is an attack on human rights, and it's a threat to Afghan security, stability, and to their economy, because 50% of the population is being kept from contributing to that economy. And we know that women who raise their voices to protest risk harassment, detention, violence, and even death. So I am really proud to be working hand in hand with the UAE and Japan to unanimously adopt a UN Security Council resolution calling for the immediate reversal of policies and practices restricting women and girls in Afghanistan and condemning the Taliban. And I can tell you that that was not an easy accomplishment. In Syria, a 13-year conflict has wreaked havoc on women who have faced gender inequalities and discriminatory laws. The Syrian political process may be stalled due to the intransigence of the Assad regime, but that is all the more reason to empower Syrian women across the board who could lead us out of this impasse and toward peace. And if I can be clear, the United States will continue to use every tool at our disposal to support the most vulnerable women and girls everywhere. Because here's what I know. While women are disproportionately impacted by violent conflict, they're also key to ending and preventing conflict. And I saw that while working in Liberia, where women were the voices that led to the peace process and electing the first woman to serve as president. And that fundamental truth is really at the heart of women, peace, and security agenda. The United States is the second largest contributor to the Women, Peace, and Humanitarian Fund. We've contributed about $39 million since 2017, and we're working with others to increase gender parity in international forums and peacekeeping missions. Another thing you said, Miriam, as I was taking notes, is that we have to do more than just give rhetorical support to WPS. We actually have to take actions, and our actions should be recorded and recognized as actions. And I will say that we're committed to doing more. We're committed to doing more in partnership with you for the daughters who enjoy fewer rights than their mothers, for many of the survivors of violence who continue to put one foot in front of another. And for the activists, I think it's important, the brave young people fighting for basic freedoms. And that reminds me, early this year, I participated in a program at USIP, awarding a Syrian woman for her activism. And she asked to spend 5 minutes with me before the program. And I expected that she was going to talk to me about the situation of Syrian women. She didn't. She talked to me about Gaza. And that said so much to me, that women's voices mean so much, that this woman dealing with a horrific situation in Syria with an opportunity to talk to a cabinet official, use that opportunity not to press her own issues, but to press for the rights of women in Gaza. That is truly what advocacy is about. It's truly what activism is about. And so we have to stand for what's right for all women, not just for ourselves. And we have to stand for those rights wherever we have an opportunity to talk about those rights. So I will end there. I will spend a few more minutes. I do have a hard stop. I just got off a plane from Jakarta, so I've been on a plane for 20 hours.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your words, and I'll actually let Mariam respond briefly. Sorry, I'm going.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your remarks, Ambassador. I'm really I'm very happy to hear that. And if I may use this opportunity, Afghan women do have a key ask. You know, you mentioned that we have to put WPS to action. So if we have to, if we're going to do that, one of the very first places where we could do that is the next Doha meeting that takes place next year, at whatever time it may take place. You saw the results of the last Doha meeting. It was absolutely disastrous. And if we're going to lead to the next Doha meeting, please ensure, and I ask all of the states that are here, that Afghan women are not treated or spoken to in a side meeting. Afghan women should be there at the table. Because if a PVPV law was announced just 1 week after the Doha meeting, then that means that law was already established when that meeting took place. And UNAMA kept telling us that this is going to be an opening, that it's great that we're bringing the Taliban onto the table. They're going to get a chance to speak to states that they've never spoken to before. And we were telling them, you're mistaken. This is only going to strengthen and embolden them. Don't do it. But no one heard us. There's 3 narratives that the UNAMA leadership keeps on giving, and I urge you all to please question these narratives. One is that engagement with the Taliban is necessary because Afghans would be worse off without international involvement. 2, pushing for women's rights leads to more repressive Taliban edicts. And 3, principled engagement might drive the Taliban away from negotiations. This is what we're told to shut us up. There is no evidence to support a correlation between these narratives and tangible outcomes. Please question them. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, and thank you for that perfect segue into our next speaker, Negina Yari, founder of Window for Hope, women's rights activist and a peace builder. We when we were speaking earlier, you were also highlighting how, the current peace talks, or the peace talks that took place up until now, did not result in peace, but rather in what you were calling, and what many are actually calling, gender apartheid.
First of all, let me thanks from everyone who are in the room and for European Union for hosting today's meeting, and also from all our friends in the States who were co-sponsor. And Arwa, thank you so much for being the wonderful moderator of today's event, and our all Afghan and Syrian panelists today. And it was to mention that really thanks from our 2 international partners from Gulf International and ICANN, and appreciated the efforts and hard work of Mariam Jalabi, the one who will work with me hardly during last 3 months that this event should be happen. Appreciated. Coming back to your question, because everything is well covered by all our panelists. I'm just highlighting that exclusion of women from the room that the decisions are made about their countries, especially the exclusion of Afghan women from the table, from the room, that made decisions about us and about our countries, will contribute to gender persecution. And that would be resulted to gender apartheid. Because until the international community is not recognize those real voices from the ground, these real voices of Afghan women, because the Afghan woman is the reality of Afghanistan. We are hearing that, oh, Taliban is the reality, you have to hear us, you have to think, you have to 1, 2, 3 points they are sharing. And it comes from different players and different actors. But I want to mention here that Afghan woman is the reality of Afghanistan. And these efforts should be recognized. These voices should be heard. And secondly, the peace talks was not happened between Afghan women and between the Taliban during the all period of the time. So it was a political talks between the states, between the countries, and between the Taliban. But whenever kind of discussions, negotiations, or engagement which is happening with the Taliban, the Afghan woman seats are always empty. Their role, their presence is not recognized yet. That's why we see that how the mandates and how the international commitments and included a lot of other agenda, which is called WPS as well, is not able to implement it because the role, the meaningful participation of women and girls is not recognized. We are not asking too much things. We are asking the spaces. We are asking to be listeners, to hear us. We are asking that our role should be recognized because Afghan woman is during last 3 years hardly doing advocacies. That would be different from different platforms, but these voices must be here. And when it comes about the women issue, it doesn't matter that issue is exist in Afghanistan or that issue would be existing in Syria, in Gaza, in Iraq, or in any other countries. we all are feeling that. We all are having the same agenda. We are all having the same situations. We are suffering and we are feeling that situation. The exclusion of women from the leadership of included in Afghanistan is normalized. That exclusion from the room that the decision made about our future, about our situation, should not be normalized, and that should be stopped. We want a room that we women should talk about our future and about our decision. And we want our role to be at the decision maker process, not only as doing a consultation. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's a very important point about how the exclusion of women is being normalized and what actually needs to be done to prevent that. And, you know, if the international community is not going to give women this space, women are going to create it for themselves. Hind Kabawat is the founder of Tastaqil, a human rights defender and an interfaith peace builder. I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on this particular topic, but also on, you know, how women, you know, right now we're seeing Syrian and Afghan women can sort of come together and create a space for themselves, own the space.
Okay, thank you, Arwa. Thank you all, and I just want to echo my colleagues to welcome all my
Hello. So I'm glad that I can see old and new friends and old colleagues, and some of them, I call them sisters. And great opportunity to be with our Afghani sisters to explore, exchange, and establish this amazing relations. We learn so much from you. I just want to reflect, and in a way, I listen to this, and it's sad. It is depressing that in the 21st century, we need to fight for our seat at the table. And guess what? If you think about all the conflict in the world, there is, of course, conflict prevention. That's what I teach, by the way, and conflict resolution. And then there is a post-conflict. And every single stage, you see women are so involved in conflict prevention. They try to make bridges between different community. Then when there is a conflict, they will be very active in the humanitarian work, in the detention file, in the advocacy, in the helping refugees, helping IDP. Women are there. Then post-conflict, we go back, and also women are the ones who are involved. Who create the war? Who create the conflict usually? They're the men. And who will be sitting at the table? The men. So the one who create the conflict are there at the table, and they exclude you, excluding everybody. I know that in the last Sudanese meeting, the military there refused completely to have any woman at the table. Yemeni the same. And why? Why do we have to go through this? Why do we have to do all this work at the ground, and then we don't have the luxury? And it's not anymore luxury, I'm sorry. It is a demand. Then I heard about the Doha. I was in Geneva last week, and from your colleague, Kofi. And she told me about something very simple, education. If the women, they were at the table in Doha, they will never let these items of education not to be confirmed at the agreement. Simply, the Taliban, they close all the schools. Simple, no more education for the girls. I'm sorry. I can't even think about in the 21st century, we have to close schools for the girls, where all those powerful women like you are sitting here, and you don't have even a role to be there at the table. I love what Elise said. Problems can make it as an opportunity. And you know what? We can get depressed, and we can get upset, and we can sit down and complain for another 10 years.
You just said action. We need action. So let's think about action today. I know it's sometimes hard to be the last one because you don't have too much to say, because all my brilliant friends, they said it all. But I can tell you, let's think about action, because we're not here just to exchange. We want to explore opportunity to make it better for all of us. If you're okay, I'm okay. And the ambassador, when she told us about the story of the Syrian woman, she talked about Gaza because it is, your pain is our pain. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for sponsoring us. Thank you for supporting us. But please, we need action. We need them to be sitting at the Doha. We need my friend Sabiha, the Kurdish colleagues, to be at the table. We want to be inclusive and have everybody at the table. Women can make a difference, and we can see this. And I know that it's very hard. We have to have our thick skin sometimes. It's hard to deal with our male colleagues, politicians. But you know what? We should never give up. Thank you for learning so much from you this week. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for all of that. And thank you to all of you actually for, the work that you're doing and kind of, you are, even though I know it's so hard, but all of you are actually breaking or at least cracking the glass ceiling for, hopefully the next generation, if not this one. And again, I also want to thank the co-sponsors again. And as you've all heard, women are taking and trying to sort of reclaim their space within these impossible situations, and it can be such a messy process, and it's not always necessarily going to be uniform. But even in the divergence of opinions, there is still this recognition, at least among women, that we must and we do respect each other, and we must and we do and we will find our own space if that space is not being opened up for us, because as we've heard today, enough is enough. And in many ways, the message that I'm getting from all of you is that right now is the time for the international community to decide if you want to be a part of the change that is going to be taking place, because that change is coming. And how smooth of a process it is and how productive of a process it is not necessarily up to the women that are doing the work on the ground. It's what the international community decides to actually do. So with that said, I would like to turn it over to remarks from our co-sponsors. Apparently I'm supposed to go in alphabetical order, so if I don't mess that part up, if I could please open the floor up to DPR Ambassador Carl Lagati from Belgium.
That's very
Thank
correct.
you. Sorry, the pronunciation.
No,
I'm like, whoopsies.
all good, all good. Thank you very much, dear Madam Moderator and ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure and a real honor actually to participate in this event, which amplifies the voices of peace activists and advocates for women's leadership. We also welcome the focus on Afghanistan, where women have been tragically erased from public life under Taliban rule over the last 3 years. Or to quote Meryl Streep during the UNGA high-level week event on Afghan women, a squirrel has more rights than a girl in Afghanistan today because the public parks have been closed to women and girls by the Taliban. Meanwhile, in Syria, women have demonstrated extraordinary resilience under the Assad regime in a conflict ongoing for 13 years, and women's participation in peace talks and decision-making remains, however, severely limited. As a general principle, the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in decision-making on the complex challenges of global peace and security, as well as political processes, is crucial. And as the recently adopted Pact of the Future states, and I quote, "None of our goals can be achieved without a full, safe, equal, and meaningful participation and representation of all women in political and economic life." Next year, we will celebrate, as was mentioned before, the 25th anniversary of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. And it's unfortunate that after 25 years or almost 25 years, there is still an urgent need to step up our efforts to ensure women have a seat at all tables. Concretely, this requires the adoption of measures to ensure that women have a place at the negotiation table and are equitably represented in governments, cabinets, and parliaments. In Syria, Belgium and the European Union have pleaded for the representation with regards to the search for a comprehensive and inclusive solution through a Syrian-led political process. It should meet the legitimate aspirations of the Syrian people. In the case of Afghanistan, Belgium has continuously advocated for the inclusion of women in delegations that meet with the Taliban, including international delegations, such as the meeting of the special envoys in Doha, which was referred to as well. In June this year, we hosted an event at our mission to give Afghan women from civil society a platform to present their recommendations in the run-up for Doha 3. Belgium has tried to keep the respect of international humanitarian law and of human rights law as the underlying element of its principled position in a series of files. This is the case for Ukraine and Gaza, and it's also the case in the context discussed today for Syria and Afghanistan. Potential solutions have been agreed upon by the Security Council and are well known. It is our collective duty to work on the implementation of Resolution 2254 regarding Syria and Resolution 2681 calling for the meaningful participation of women in Afghanistan, among others. Women leadership has to play a central role in these implementations. It is the only sustainable way forward. Ladies and gentlemen, our leaders came together in September to recognize the crucial role of women as agents of peace in the pact of the future. I want to conclude with a word of thanks and congratulations to all of you for the work you've been doing in pursuing the objectives discussed here today. Human rights defenders and female activists play a crucial role, often at risk for their own lives or of the lives of their families. The battle you've been fighting is a worthy one and in which Belgium stands by your side. And I want to conclude by saying that we heard your call for action loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would now like to turn the floor over to the political coordinator at the Permanent Mission of Canada to the UN, Mr. Christopher Gibbons.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the European Union for hosting us here today, and to the organizers, of course, the Syrian Women's Political Movement, the Afghan Women Coordination Umbrella, and the Window for Hope for bringing us together today. In hearing from such powerful speakers, as all of you have been today, we have heard of the shared suffering of women and girls due to the repressive actions of brutal regimes, which comes to no surprise in both cases are led exclusively by men. Canada has no bilateral relations with either regime in power, but we do continue to have deep and enduring solidarity with the people of both Afghanistan and Syria through supporting women's organizations and a range of other humanitarian and development assistance. Also, we have heard today, just as we have heard from powerful women leaders before you, of the importance of seeking to hold those regimes to account. That is why in June 2023, Canada, together with the Netherlands, brought a case against Syria to the International Court of Justice, accusing the Syrian regime of torture and other cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment and punishment of its own people since 2011. That step was many years in the making and was only possible because of the many briefings, conferences, and meetings, just like this one today, where brave survivors of the Syrian regime, including the SWPM, shared their stories with us. Similarly, just last month, Canada, together with the Netherlands, Australia, and Germany, announced the initiation of legal proceedings against the Taliban regime for gender persecution under the Convention for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, to which Afghanistan is a party. This is the first step in what is sure to be a long process. particularly as it is the first of its kind, that is to say, of a country or countries in this case, taking another to the ICJ for its violations of CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. That said, as we saw in the torture case against Syria, our collective efforts there have already resulted in provisional measures which are binding on the Syrian regime. Canada remains committed to holding these regimes to account and to the importance of these conventions that form the basis of international law. While certain measures such as initiating an ICJ case remain the purview of member states, our ability to move forward on these cases is fully reliant on the information that has been shared with us, including by the brave women we've heard from today. So thank you, all of you, for all that you do, and please do continue to hold us to account when you're not getting what you need from our end so that we can help contribute to holding these repressive regimes to account internationally. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And now I'd like to open the floor to the Senior Advisor on Gender Equality and Women, Peace and Security for the European Union, Jonna Naumanen. I hope I'm sorry. I'm like close, very close.
I will speak rather from the heart than from policy papers.
Thank you.
Just because I do work on gender equality and women, peace and security. If I go back to August 2021, I remember thinking I will not stop raising or amplifying the voices for Afghan women until the situation is better. And that is certainly work that we've been trying to do. Sometimes failing, but certainly continuing to fight that, because what is really clear is that, and that goes for both contexts, Afghanistan, Syria, but also others, if women are not on the table, they're on the menu. And that is what we are seeing in all these contexts. And we see that, and what came up in very fantastic discussions we've had at the Women, Peace and Security Focal Points Network this week, is that the failure to stand up for violations only normalizes violations. And it invigorates other actors in other contexts to do similarly. And if we think that this will be the baseline where we are, women of this world are facing a storm. And in very much similarly what Maya Angelou said many times, that, you know, God, it escapes my head, but basically we're in the same situation. We are not free until others are free. EU wants to amplify and aims to amplify across the policies on women's voices. And we've certainly placed participation of women as a cross-cutting priority for everything we do on women, peace and security, and not as a separate pillar, but as a pillar that contributes to all the other women, peace and security efforts. And we've aimed to mainstream this principle also in other aspects and other political contexts. Participation goes beyond mediation, goes beyond peace talks. And tomorrow we will have the Security Council debate, very much focusing on peace talks, peace processes, but you will hear from the European Union side that we consider this must go beyond, especially in politically important dialogues, including difficult contexts like Afghanistan. What I've witnessed in the last year is division of feminist movements, which is concerning. But at the same time, what I see very proudly is this unification of feminist movements, like we see in context of Middle East. Like Ambassador of US said earlier, that women are using their voices to amplify the voices of others. And this is somewhere where I see space also for us, as whether it's financial contributors or political actors, to support those civic spaces, so that women's civic spaces do not continue to be shrunk, but that we can continue amplifying them. And at the EU side, we do that also through different mechanisms, and I would emphasize one that relates to more the safety of the civic spaces with the human rights defenders mechanism, particularly aim to support women human rights defenders amongst the many others. And just to conclude, I want to go back to EU statement a few years ago that said that we stand with all the women and the women across the world are redefining the word courage because they are doing this work at enormous cost. And we need to be the actors that ensure that this space where they work is safe. It is not their duty to make it safe, it's our duty to work for a safe space for them to be able to do the work they do. So thank you, all of you, and all of your colleagues and sisters.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to turn it over to DPRJ. Sorry, I'm gonna. Dahraman.
I won't leave it to you, dramatically. But first, I want really to say that I'm very proud to be here, and we are very proud as France so to support this event. It's an honor for us in a way. I won't make it long, and just like the colleagues, I would not make a speech. I will just add. I will make a specific points on the question of women, peace and security and the way we see it, and also maybe ask a question if we have time for answers for that. You made very clear in two specific contexts, but you made it very clear, so Afghanistan and Syria, but you made very clear also it doesn't stop there. And it's not because we have not women from other countries that we are not supportive and we are not listening to what can be said in different conflict areas, but also non-conflict areas where the women voices have to be heard. But of course, we have to pay attention at the same time, and it's what we're trying to do. But it's also a question I wanted to raise, because we're trying to pay attention to the specific context in which you are. The question, the Taliban rule in Afghanistan has nothing to do, of course, with the way Syria is now led and so on. But for us, it's very tricky also to help you in these types of contexts. We have to pay attention to the regional issue, and the Doha discussion were mentioned, and you know exactly. So I think all countries were around the table pleaded before Doha 3 that you had a seat, but you didn't have any at Doha 3. We know it. And we won't wait until Doha 4 for that. But the question is also this one. So how, what is the common type of message we can address within women, peace and security in order to be more effective in the different gremia, in the different fora where we are? And I will, from our side, I will just say how we see it. Of course, as you were mentioning, you asked to have a seat, but what we are asking for you, but we shouldn't be the one just saying that. It should come from many countries to have a driving seat at all types of procedures. So some colleagues made it very clear. It's not a question of having a seat during the conflict resolution. You mentioned the conflict prevention. There is peace building. There are situations without any conflict. How to make the messages being very simple also that we can be heard from what we would say, what we'd call non-like-minded countries. So countries that run from time to time in the regional background. So I'm turning mostly to Afghanistan, also to Syria, but to be heard in the way we frame it. Because you know perfectly when it's coming from our countries, and I will talk only from France, from time to time they're saying, okay, but you say so. And we're trying also to take your message on board, saying, no, it's not us talking. It's the women of your country, the mothers of your country who are talking. But we are, in a way, say, a little bit suspicious, some eyes. So I would be very keen, and also on this plaidoyer and how we will frame and prepare also for the debate for tomorrow to be more effective. And of course, we'll be at your disposition at any time afterwards, just to get the messages that we hear from you, from the women and the associations being brought, but also, and this is the second question, and something I discussed also with some associations for Afghanistan and Myanmar very recently, how to have our voices to be listened and to be heard also from the civil societies in the countries. And we know how difficult it can be also to reach your countries in different paths. I will stop here in order that other colleagues can make really, I didn't take any point of my speech, but you know exactly what our positions, political positions on Syria and Afghanistan wouldn't bring anything to you. Thanks a lot for being here also.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And we'll hopefully get you some answers towards the end of this. I would like to turn it now over to DPR and Dostart from Luxembourg.
Thank you very much. Thank you for organizing this event and thank you for having me. I will also be short. I think we cannot repeat enough the role of women, but we all agree in this room, so we don't need to recall it. For me, the most important is really to be here today to hear your recommendations and your ideas. Like you mentioned, Hasina, you mentioned the Convention on Crimes Against Humanity as an opportunity. And I think, it's really those ideas that are incredibly helpful. And under your initiative, together with the help of member states, we can do something and we are here for you and to help, like Canada mentioned, the ICJ case. So everything we can do to help you to bring concrete change, to help you. You said action, action, action. So we are here to listen to you. And I think, there are examples. So if you have creative ideas on how we can help you, we stand with you. Maybe one example, just we were approached a year ago by Syrian families of missing persons, and with their help and all their advocacy, we created a new institution. Luxembourg took the pen on missing persons in Syria in the General Assembly. So if there's any ideas on where we can help, you have our contacts. We are here, and I think, as you said, action, action, action. And if there's anything we can do, please let us know.
Thank you very much for that. And finally, I would like to give the floor to Paul Shrubsole, Deputy Head of the Gender and Children and Conflict Department with the United Kingdom. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let me begin by thanking the organisers for today's event and for the panellists and your really powerful words today. It's really important that we have these moments to amplify women's voices in particularly such challenging circumstances. So thank you. As we approach the 25th anniversary of Security Council Resolution 1325, we, the UK, remain steadfast in our commitment to the women, peace and security agenda. It's both the right thing to do, but also the smart thing to do. From what we've heard today, it just underlines the continued need to advocate for women's participation. And we know that women's participation significantly boosts the chances of long-lasting peace. We're also absolutely committed to amplifying women's voices and following up on the recommendations of civil society. We've heard very clearly your call to action today. And we absolutely understand the need to support local women's rights organisations. Women's rights organisations are vital to sustaining conflict prevention and resolutions efforts, and I'm really proud that the UK has been able to provide £33 million in partnership with the Equality Fund to support thousands of women's rights organisations in conflict zones. But as we're talking about Syria and Afghanistan particularly today, I'd like to touch on both of those. So on Afghanistan, as the new Foreign Secretary David Lammy said on the 24th of August, the Taliban's further oppression of women with its so-called vice and virtue law in Afghanistan is appalling. Women's exclusion from all aspects of public life is another tragic setback for the country and its people. The UK government remains committed to helping the people of Afghanistan. Our current £151 million aid programme provides vital life-saving support to the country's most vulnerable people, especially women and girls. And we are committed to at least 50% of those reached by UK aid in Afghanistan are women and girls. And I can reassure you that working bilaterally, but also with international partners, we regularly press the Taliban to reverse their inhumane restrictions. On Syria, given the impact of the conflict on women and girls, it's crucial that women are involved in peace talks. Their participation in the Syrian-led political process should be full, equal, meaningful and safe. I want to thank the groups and representatives, including those of you here today, who have made space for women's voices in negotiations and are delivering crucial work on the ground. Support to women and girls is at the heart of the UK's policy and programmes in Syria, including through active engagement with women rights activists, women-led organisations, and women involved in political processes. Our programming looks to directly support grassroots organisations working on gender-sensitive and victim-centred approaches to transitional justice. And we are directly supporting Syrians documenting and gathering evidence to hold the Assad regime to account for sexual and gender-based violence, which has resulted in the first conviction for sexual crimes. I'd like to, as I finish, come back to where I started and kind of address directly our speakers today. We're exceptionally grateful for the work that you do, and particularly the risks that you take in doing that work. We're grateful to you for sharing your experiences, but most of all, I'm grateful to you for sharing your advice and recommendations. It's both obviously important that women participate, but it's vital that you shape the decisions and solutions going forward. So thank you for your advice today.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And if anyone would want to respond to the questions that we heard posed, we have like 3 minutes. So good luck.
Okay, just briefly, one of your questions that I've been thinking about since whenever I attend the UN meetings is the countries that are not allies and they do not endorse the same thing, and they're in UN Security Council. So what do we do about it? I would say, you know, in some meetings, we Afghan women, we would advocate for, you guys are the ones who sit with them, so you should push for it. But there's only much that you can do if the other side is not agreeing to meet certain groups. Like China and Russia never agreed to meet Afghan women. And I guess you can't force them to do it. But speaking of maybe creative, maybe not ideas, what I thought of was from what I heard on the ground inside the country, there's a lot happening that are not right, and they're being endorsed or supported by these countries. For instance, a lot of the people I talk with for my research, they told me the Afghan women, social movement leaders, that you know, there's a lot of surveillance cameras being installed all around you know, their houses if they're identified as an activist or a social movement leader. And overall in the whole country, like hundreds of thousands of cameras that are allegedly reported that they're by the Chinese government for whatever reason. So these are the kind of things that I think the Western countries can document from inside the country. And UN missions can play a very important role in this. Unfortunately, as we talked about, UNAMA hasn't been that helpful when it comes to the cause of women's rights inside the country. But I think, first of all, working with the UNAMA and talking with them, the kind of policies and politics that they have, and then documenting women's rights and human rights abuses inside the country and these countries' involvement. And the final step is exposing them. I know that there's a lot of people working in Security Council who document, but they're waiting for some magical time to expose these countries. I think today the biggest pressure you can create on these countries is media and social media. So if you don't expose them in international platforms that so and so country is supporting doing, for instance, in investments that they are having inside, like China having in the Afghanistan, in Wakhan border between the Afghanistan, northeastern Afghanistan and China, and all the ISIS support or the other like terrorism that's inside the country, their ties with the Taliban, that they are accepting their, you know, ambassadors and their envoys one by one. So all of that, they need to be taken accountable. And we understand as you know, women of Afghanistan, that it's very hard. Your job is very hard if you're sitting with, you know, like in the Security Council, there's 5 countries, and they're gonna say, no, we don't want the gender agenda on the gender or human rights on the agenda of Afghanistan. It's more about security for us. It's more about regional, and you have other conflicts, different places. So I would say UNAMO from inside the country and UN of other offices can play a crucial role, but of course their job is also not easy. They have to deal with them inside the country, but they should be documenting and giving it, and I'm sure they are, but exposing is important. Putting it to the public eye in the internationally media and social media is important. Yeah.
Thank
So-
you. Hind, did you want to take that up as well?
I know,
Go for it.
I know there's not lots of time for this, but when we talk about action, it's like walk the talk. So I'm very happy that you're all here and supporting, but we really need to do something and pressures, and we don't want just to be like a window dressing. We just want to do the work. So in the past, when I was part of the negotiation, EU helped us a lot and pressured our colleagues to accept us at the table. And this is something you all can do also for our sister in Afghanistan. There is a pressure, the international community, they can do a lot for this, and you cannot just leave today without a plan. So please just walk the talk, and we should think about the future. There will be no future for peace. If you're all talking about peace, there will be no peace without women in this world. Thank you.
Thank you. And Negina.
Yes, just would be last one to say thank you to everyone, and we're really looking forward for the upcoming actions and steps, and we want to work together to have a position paper as well that would be coming in next month to have very specific action points and recommendation to international community to help support women and girls' rights globally. And secondly, it's all needed for not limited to the technical support, but it's also needed for more resources as well. So helping and strengthening the voices of women and girls inside the country and outside the country is also depend on the resources. So I'm kindly requesting from states, international community, and the donors to be as much flexible as they can to support the local actors on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. And in closing, I want to thank all of our speakers, all of the co-sponsors, and everyone else, and all of you who have tuned in. I just also want to sort of round out by saying, change is coming, and again, it's up to the international community to decide whether or not it wants to be a part of that change. I think we know exactly what the world looks like when women are not part of policy. It's the mess that we have right now, and none of us should be proud of that. So I think that, if anything, is an indication that, all of us need to rally in whatever way we can to support those women who are actually doing the hard work for all of us. And thank you very much again.
Thank you.